Welcome in. If you are joining us right now, it is highly likely you are doing so because you are looking for an edge.
Right.
Maybe you're prepping for a massive, high-stakes meeting that has your stomach in absolute knots.
Right.
Or maybe you are seeking to sharpen your mental resilience against a world that just feels increasingly chaotic lately.
Which is completely understandable.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Or maybe you are just insanely curious about how ancient minds dealt with the exact same universal human struggles that keep you awake at night. Whatever brought you here, you, the learner, are in the exact right place. Okay, let's unpack this because we have something truly extraordinary on the table today. We are going to bypass the modern self-help aisle completely and just go straight to the source of Western resilience.
The absolute bedrock of it.
Exactly. Our foundational text for this deep dive is a very specific vintage document. We are looking at a 1974 Turkish translation of a timeless classic. It's a PDF titled Marcus Aurelius Kendime Düşünceler, translated by Seda Eskin and published by Yanka Yayınları. And right off the bat, I mean, we really need to establish the premise of what we are looking at here.
We do, because context is everything with this text.
Right, because these pages, these thoughts to myself, they were never meant to be a public lecture.
Yeah.
This isn't a politician drafting a speech or a philosopher writing a treatise for his students.
No, not at all.
This is a private diary. It was written by a Roman emperor, often while sitting in a general's tent on the freezing, muddy front lines of ancient wars.
Yeah, literally covered in mud and blood.
He was the most powerful man on the planet, writing exclusively to his own soul, just trying to figure out how to be a good human being.
And that privacy, the sheer privacy of the text is exactly what makes it so vital for us. The mission of this deep dive is to take that raw, unfiltered private journal and extract the most actionable nuggets of psychological resilience, emotional regulation, and clear-sightedness.
The real practical stuff.
Exactly. We are looking to translate the incredibly intense life-or-death struggles of an ancient Roman emperor into a practical toolkit for your modern life. What's fascinating here is if you look closely, our environment has shifted to reflect this exact bridge. We are sitting in a space that blends the rugged canvas and heavy timber of an ancient Roman general's campaign tent with the serene, clean lines of a minimalist modern study.
It's a really cool vibe, actually.
It is. It is the visual representation of what we are doing today, pulling ancient battle-tested wisdom across the centuries and applying it directly to your laptop-lit modern reality. I mean, Marcus Aurelius was managing an empire plagued betrayals and endless wars. But the psychological tools he developed to survive that pressure cooker are exactly the tools you need to navigate your inbox, your difficult colleagues, and your own internal resistance.
I want to start right at the beginning of the text, because when you open book one, you kind of have certain expectations.
Sure, you expect grandeur.
Yeah, you expect a Roman emperor to start with some grand, sweeping philosophical theory about the cosmos or the nature of the gods. But he completely subverts that. He starts with what I can only really describe as a highly specific, granular gratitude list.
Yes, the catalog of virtues.
He literally catalogs exactly what he learned from the people around him. It is a meticulous accounting of character traits. I know he starts with his family, particularly his mother. Could you walk us through what he was actually extracting from her character?
Certainly. It's a very revealing passage. From his mother, he writes that he learned piety, generosity, and an absolute aversion to even thinking about doing evil, let alone actually doing it.
Wow.
He also credits her with teaching him the value of simple living, noting how she actively rejected the luxurious lifestyle that wealthy people usually surrender to. He doesn't just casually thank her for being a good person. He is forensically examining her psychology.
I have to pause you right there and push back on something because this immediately stuck out to me.
Go for it.
Having an aversion to doing evil makes total sense. We all try not to do terrible things. But having an aversion to even thinking about doing evil, that feels impossible.
Yeah.
Our brains throw random, petty, or malicious thoughts at us all the time.
They absolutely do.
Like someone cuts you off in traffic and your brain instantly thinks something awful. Is he saying we are supposed to somehow police our subconscious?
That is exactly the friction that makes Stoic cognitive theory so demanding. He isn't talking about policing the subconscious flash of a thought. He is talking about what you do the millisecond after that thought arrives.
Okay, so it's the reaction to the thought.
Exactly. In Stoicism, action follows thought. If you allow your mind to indulge in malicious, petty, or corrupt thoughts, if you entertain them, roll them around, and savor them, even if you never act on them, you're already poisoning your inner environment.
You're letting the rot in.
Precisely. By recognizing this trait in his mother, Marcus is setting a standard for his own cognitive hygiene. He is saying, I will not let my mind become a playground for malice. And his note about her simple living is deeply connected to this.
How so? Because he was an emperor. He literally owned everything. Why does an emperor care about simple living?
Because he recognized that luxury softens the mind. He was surrounded by patrician wealth, absolute opulence. Rome at that time was the epicenter of excess.
It was the height of indulgence.
Yet he observed his mother rejecting it. He knew that if he became dependent on luxury, his happiness would be held hostage by his external circumstances. If you need silk sheets and imported wine to be content, you are incredibly vulnerable.
You're fragile.
Exactly. This isn't just saying thank you to his mom. It is a deliberate exercise in character building. He's observing the virtues of others to create a composite blueprint for his own ideal self.
A composite blueprint. I was looking at his notes on his tutor, and this is where it gets incredibly relatable to modern office politics.
Oh, the chariot races.
Yes. He thanks his tutor for teaching him to mind his own business, to do his own work, and crucially, not to take sides in the chariot races, specifically the greens versus the blues or the gladiator fights. Now, obviously, we aren't betting on gladiators in the break room, but the psychology here seems identical to how we deal with factions today.
It is identical. The Greens and the Blues were the massive sports factions of Rome, but they also carried heavy political weight. People would riot in the streets over them. They would base their entire identities around which team they supported.
So it was just pure tribalism.
Tribalism in its purest form. By thanking his tutor for teaching him not to be a partisan of the Greens or the Blues, Marcus is praising the virtue of emotional independence. He is actively reminding himself not to get sucked into tribalism, not to let his peace of mind be dictated by arbitrary competitions that ultimately do not matter.
Think about how much energy is wasted today engaging in the modern equivalents of the Greens and the Blues. And I don't just mean sports. I mean toxic corporate rivalries where marketing hates sales, or endless online outrage cycles where you're expected to loudly declare your allegiance to whatever the controversy of the day is.
It's exhausting.
It really is. Marcus is essentially programming his mind to remain above the fray, to do his own work, and to refuse to let external drama hijack his attention.
And that restraint is a core theme in his observations. Consider his note about Alexander the Grammarian. The text details how Marcus admired Alexander's art of gentle correction.
Oh, I love this part.
Instead of harshly criticizing someone for a language mistake or a syntax error, Alexander would seamlessly use the correct term in a supportive reply. He wouldn't point out the flaw to humiliate the person. He would just model the right behavior in a collaborative way. The text explicitly says Alexander wouldn't wound people with his criticism. Instead, he would use a supportive testimony or pivot the discussion to the core subject rather than the formal mistake.
Which is an incredibly rare leadership trait. Imagine you send an email with a glaring typo or a misunderstood concept to your boss.
Usually a nightmare scenario.
Right. The standard corporate response is usually a reply, all that subtly or not so subtly points out your incompetence. But Marcus is an emperor. He could have literally executed people for disagreeing with him or sounding foolish. Yet he chooses to idolize a grammarian who knew how to correct someone with absolute grace and zero ego.
It shows Marcus deliberately studying how to wield power and knowledge without crushing the people beneath him. He is teaching himself that you don't need to diminish someone else to prove you're right. But to truly understand how Marcus viewed power, we have to look at his observations of his adoptive father, Antoninus Pius.
Right. The previous emperor.
Antoninus represents the ultimate Stoic ideal made flesh for Marcus. He was the reigning emperor before Marcus, and Marcus watched him with intense scrutiny.
The list of things Marcus admires about Antoninus is huge, but a few things really jumped out at me. He talks about his unswerving decision-making, his complete indifference to empty honors, and his emotional stability. But the one that really got me was how Antoninus handled the comforts of life.
Yes, the text notes that his father could use the comforts of life when they were available without arrogance, but when they weren't available, he simply didn't need them. This is the absolute embodiment of the classic Stoic concept of preferred indifference.
Okay, let's unpack this concept, because I think a lot of people misunderstand Stoicism as this grim, joyless existence where you have to sleep on a bed of nails and eat dry bread to prove how tough you are. Does preferred indifference mean you can actually enjoy nice things?
It does, and it's a vital distinction. The Stoics categorize things like wealth, health, and a good reputation as preferred indifference. They are preferred because naturally it is better to be wealthy than poor and healthy than sick.
Obviously.
But they are indifferent because they have absolutely no bearing on your moral character or your ultimate happiness. You can enjoy a nice meal, a warm bed, or a massive promotion, but your happiness cannot depend on them. If they vanish tomorrow, if the wealth is lost or the health fails, your emotional baseline shouldn't move.
So it's about not being attached to them.
Precisely. Antoninus lived this perfectly. If the palace chefs prepared a feast, he enjoyed it. If he was on a military campaign eating hardtack, he was equally content. Furthermore, Marcus mentions two other pivotal figures who shaped this worldview, Rusticus and Fronto.
I know Rusticus was the one who introduced him to Epictetus, right?
Yes, and that fundamentally shifted his worldview. But Rusticus also did something incredibly brave. He made Marcus realize his own character needed correcting. He warned the future emperor against the vanity of showing off his learning or writing pathetic, emotionally manipulative speeches just to win the applause of the crowd. He taught Marcus to reject sophistry.
That takes guts to tell a future emperor he's being vain.
Absolutely. And Fronto, his rhetoric teacher, taught him to observe the cruelty, the hypocrisy, and the deceit of tyrants. Through Fronto, Marcus realized that many of the so-called patricians, the ultra-elite of Rome, lacked basic human affection. Marcus is cataloging these observations so he doesn't become the very monster he was raised to rule over.
Imagine doing this yourself. Just pause and think about this for a second. Imagine if you constructed your professional or personal identity by consciously cherry-picking the best traits of your colleagues, your mentors, and your family members. Imagine sitting down tonight and actively writing them out. I want Sarah's grace under pressure. I want David's ability to focus without complaining. I want my grandfather's refusal to gossip. You are literally writing a software patch for your own brain, imprinting these traits onto your mind.
And he applies the self-correction to the most mundane, everyday frustrations as well. There is a brilliant detail in the text about Alexander the Platonist. Marcus writes that he learned from him never to use the excuse, "I'm too busy to dodge social duties or avoid obligations to friends." He specifically warns against constantly citing the urgency of affairs to put off what we owe to our community.
That hits so close to home. Because today, busyness isn't just an excuse. It is a status symbol.
It's a badge of honor now.
It is. If you ask someone how they are, the default answer is, "Oh, I'm just so busy right now, slammed." We use busy as a shield to avoid being present for the people who actually matter. We make our overflowing inboxes our entire personality.
Which is exactly what Marcus was warning against. The man was running the Roman Empire. He was managing plagues, wars, and famines. Yet he reminded himself not to pull the "I'm too busy" card to get out of basic human obligations. It forces you to ask, are you actually too busy, or are you just poorly prioritizing your human duties?
That is a brutal reality check. And this whole first book is essentially Marcus observing the external world, observing the people around him, and using them as a mirror to manage his own mind. But how does he manage that mind when he first wakes up? Because if book 1 is the gratitude journal, book 2 and book 5 give us what I call his morning mental armor.
Yes, the famous morning routine.
I want to dive into this because this dawn routine is probably one of the most practical things in all of ancient philosophy. How exactly did the most powerful man in the world start his day?
In book 2, Marcus establishes a stark, uncompromising morning meditation. He says that at the very break of dawn, you should tell yourself today, I will encounter a busybody, a bully, a traitor, a jealous person, and an unsociable person. He literally instructs himself to expect to meet terrible, annoying, frustrating people the moment he leaves his tent.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Isn't that just a profoundly toxic and pessimistic way to live? If I wake up every morning and tell myself everyone I meet today is going to be a backstabbing jerk, I feel like I am just setting myself up for misery. I'm actively manifesting a terrible day.
It sounds pessimistic at first glance, but you have to look at the psychological mechanics of what he is doing. Why is he front-loading his day with the expectation of terrible behavior? Because surprise is the enemy of emotional regulation.
Sure.
If you wake up expecting everyone to be kind, rational, and helpful, you will be constantly shocked, hurt, and enraged when they inevitably aren't. Marcus is setting his baseline expectations to match reality. He is putting on his armor before the arrows start flying. But the true brilliance of this exercise isn't just in expecting difficult people. It is in how the text explains why they are difficult.
Right. He doesn't just write them off as evil monsters.
Exactly. The text states that these people suffer from ignorance. They don't know the true nature of good and evil. They act this way because they are blind to what is truly meaningful in life. They think taking your money or insulting your pride or cutting you off in traffic actually matters.
Because they're caught up in the superficial stuff.
Right. And because he understands they are acting out of profound ignorance, he realizes two crucial things. First, they cannot actually harm him. True harm in Stoicism only comes from being implicated in ugliness or vice. They cannot force Marcus to be vicious, therefore they cannot harm him. Second, he realizes he cannot hate them or be angry with them.
Wait, he says he cannot be angry with them, even if they are actively trying to destroy him.
Yes, because as the text explicitly argues, they share a divine spark with him. They possess a portion of the same universal intelligence, the same intellect. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text uses a profoundly beautiful analogy. Marcus writes that human beings are made to work together just like the upper and lower rows of teeth, or like hands, or like feet. To turn against each other, to feel anger and hatred toward one another, is fundamentally against nature.
That is a wild image.
Yeah.
The teeth.
It works perfectly, though. When you feel hatred toward a difficult coworker, you are essentially the upper row of teeth trying to grind away the lower row of teeth. It is self-destructive to the whole organism of humanity.
I want you listening right now to think about how your morning commute or your daily team meetings or your interactions with clients would change if you front-loaded your empathy exactly like this. What if, before you even opened your laptop, you expected friction? And what if, instead of viewing that friction as a personal attack, you pre-forgave it?
It changes everything.
What if you viewed that abrasive client or that micromanaging boss as simply acting out of ignorance of what is truly good rather than malice? You would walk into that meeting wearing bulletproof emotional armor. You would look at them and think, we are the upper and lower teeth. You are grinding right now, but I am not going to let it destroy my peace.
That is the practical application. But what makes Marcus so compelling is that he doesn't just philosophize from a pedestal, he struggles with it. In Book 5, we get an incredibly raw glimpse of the emperor literally debating with himself about just getting out of bed in the first place.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this is my favorite passage, because it is so deeply human. He is having the exact same argument I have with my alarm clock every morning. He says, I am waking up to do the work of a human being was I made to huddle under blankets and stay warm. The Emperor of Rome wants to hit the snooze button.
It proves that human nature hasn't changed in 2 millennia. But look at how he logically dismantles his own resistance. He argues with his own inner voice. The voice of comfort says, but this is more pleasant. And his higher reasoning responds, were you born to feel pleasure? Were you not born for action?
He's guilting himself out of bed.
He is. He looks to the cosmos to shame himself into action. He reminds himself that spiders, bees, ants, and birds all wake up and immediately begin doing their specific jobs to keep the universe running. They don't complain. They just do the work of their nature. So he asks himself a piercing question. Why is the human being resisting his nature? Why are you not running to do what your nature demands?
It's such a powerful reframe. You aren't just getting up to go to a boring job. You're getting up to play your specific necessary part in the mechanics of the universe. But doing that and surviving those difficult people requires maintaining a massive amount of self-control. How does he actually separate himself from the chaos of the day?
The text insists on a strict separation between your physical body and your mind. Marcus repeatedly tells himself to view his physical existence objectively. The body is just a collection of blood bones and a web of nerves. The breath is just air that is constantly being sucked in and pushed out, never the same from one moment to the next. What actually matters is the directing mind, the ruling principle.
The core of who you are.
Right. The text commands you not to let this directing mind be a puppet jerked around by selfish impulses or external provocations.
But how do we stop being the puppet? Because when someone insults me or when I see an ad for something I desperately want, I feel those strings pulling me.
You cut the strings by changing how you perceive the things pulling you. Which brings us to one of the most powerful cognitive tools in the entire text, Stoic X-ray vision. Mastering that directing mind requires a very specific way of looking at the world. You have to see things as they actually are, stripped of all their marketing, their societal hype, and their emotional baggage. In books 3 and 6, Marcus meticulously deconstructs objects of desire, luxury, or status down to their bare, raw, physical components. He wants to strip away the myth and the prestige that society attaches to them so they lose their power over him.
The examples he uses in the text are just brutal. He takes things that Romans literally worshipped and reduces them to absolute nothingness. Can you walk us through some of these deconstructions?
Certainly. He looks at a fancy purple robe, which was the ultimate symbol of imperial power and unimaginable wealth in Rome. Only the absolute elite could wear purple. But Marcus tells himself this is just sheep's wool soaked in the blood of a shellfish. He looks at Falernian wine, the most expensive, luxurious vintage available, poured at the greatest banquets, and he says this is just the fermented juice of a grape. He even deconstructs sexual intercourse, describing it clinically as just friction and the excretion of fluid. And the grand banquets with roasted meats, he reminds himself that he is just looking at the corpse of a bird or the corpse of a pig. He completely annihilates the glamour.
Okay, I have to push back here again. Doesn't this just kill all the joy in life? If I sit down at a Michelin star restaurant and tell myself I am eating the scorched corpse of a cow and drinking rotten grape juice, I'm going to be miserable. If we strip the magic out of everything, aren't we just left with a cold, depressing, clinical reality?
That is a very common reaction to this exercise, but it misses the deeper aesthetic philosophy of Stoicism. He annihilates the glamour because glamour is dangerous. The text explicitly warns value estimation is a terrible sophist. When we attach irrationally high value to luxury, prestige, or physical pleasure, our own minds deceive us.
It warps our priorities.
Yes, prestige tricks you into losing your philosophical grounding. By breaking a purple robe down to sheep hair and dead snail blood, he prevents his mind from being intimidated by wealthy displays or corrupted by superficial desires. He ensures his integrity is never for sale, because why would you betray your morals for sheep's wool? But to your point about joy, the text does not leave you in a bleak, clinical void. There is a profound flip side to this X-ray vision.
How so? Where does the joy come from if everything is reduced to its physics?
While he deconstructs luxury to make it mundane, he uses this exact same vision to find profound, almost overwhelming beauty in the mundane byproducts of nature. The text talks about looking at a loaf of bread baking in the oven. The baker doesn't intend for the crust to crack open, but those cracks form naturally, and they have a specific appetizing beauty. He talks about figs bursting open when they are overly ripe. He talks about the furrowed brow of a lion or the foam on the mouth of a wild boar. He is saying that if you have a mind perfectly attuned to the universal nature, you will find a unique charm in the inevitable and natural processes of life.
So he isn't destroying beauty, he is just relocating it from artificial human luxuries to the truth of nature.
Exactly. The cracked bread, the bursting fig, these are signs of a process reaching its natural peak. He even extends this to human beings, noting that a philosophical eye can appreciate the harsh, austere beauty in the aging faces of older men and women. This is a complete rejection of the superficial aesthetic of youth and artificial perfection. He is finding beauty in the truth of reality exactly as it is.
Let's apply this Stoic X-ray vision to modern life, because I think this is where the text becomes incredibly potent. Think about the luxury items, the titles or the status symbols that you're currently stressing out over. Let's take the corporate title. You might be losing sleep, working 80-hour weeks, missing your kids' bedtimes, all to get the title of Senior Executive Vice President.
Oh.
But if we apply Marcus's technique, what is that title physically? It is a specific arrangement of pixels in your email signature.
That's entirely accurate.
It is a slightly larger rectangular desk made of composite wood. That's it. Or consider the luxury watch you are saving up for to prove you've made it. It isn't a magical totem of success. It is a collection of tiny metal gears and a piece of glass strapped to your wrist. When you unpack it slowly, when you force yourself to look at the raw, physical reality of the things giving you anxiety, it breaks the spell.
It absolutely breaks the spell.
Literally.
And breaking that spell is necessary because if you are obsessed with the illusion of status, you are essentially asleep. The text repeatedly emphasizes that you must see things clearly to act justly. If you are blinded by the desire for that pixelated email signature, you might betray a colleague to get it. You might betray your directing mind. Reducing these temptations ensures you remain in control.
So what does this all mean? Because once you start realizing that the physical objects we chase are impermanent and fundamentally empty of inherent value, the text forces you to take the next logical step. You pivot from the impermanence of physical objects to the impermanence of life and fame itself. And this brings us to the most sobering part of the text, what I consider the great equalizer. Throughout books 4, 6, 8, and 9, Marcus returns obsessively to the meditation on death and the fleeting nature of life. He doesn't just mention it in passing, he dwells on it.
It is the ultimate recurring theme. Marcus constantly reminds himself of the fate of the great conquerors and the great philosophers. He lists them out: Alexander the Great, Pompey, Julius Caesar. These were men who conquered the known world, destroyed entire civilizations, and commanded tens of thousands of soldiers. And then they died. He lists the philosophers Socrates, Pythagoras, Heraclitus. They uncovered the mysteries of the cosmos. And then they died. He wants to embed this reality deeply into his consciousness. No amount of worldly power and no amount of towering intellect provides an escape hatch from mortality.
There is this one striking image from the source text that just stopped me in my tracks when I read it. Marcus writes that Alexander of Macedon and his mule driver met the exact same fate. When they died, They were either reabsorbed into the universe's generative reason, or they were scattered into identical atoms in the void. Think about the brutality of that reality check.
It's very stark.
The emperor who conquered the world, who believed he was a god, and the nameless guy who fed his donkeys ended up in the exact same state of non-existence. The universe did not care about the crown.
And Marcus, sitting in his own imperial tent, uses this to dismantle the illusion of posthumous fame. Many people accept they will die, but they cling desperately to the idea of leaving a legacy. They want statues, they want their names in history books, they want to be remembered. But the text aggressively attacks this comfort. Marcus points out that the people who want to be remembered after death forget that the people doing the remembering will also die shortly, and the people who come after them will die. He describes fame as a relay race of fading memories passing like a flickering torch from one mortal to the next until it eventually hits total oblivion.
It's like building a massive monument out of sand right at the edge of the tide. You can build it as high as you want, but the water is coming.
This raises an important question, though.
Yeah, I really grappled with this. If Alexander the Great and his mule driver end up as the same dust, and if all fame is just a temporary echo destined to be forgotten, isn't this just nihilism? Why bother doing anything at all? Why should I work hard on a project or try to build a company or even try to be a good person if it all just gets washed away into nothingness?
That is the trap many people fall into when they first encounter Stoic meditations on death. But the text's answer is an emphatic no. This realization does not lead to nihilism, it leads to liberation.
Liberation. How so?
The text argues that realizing your life is just a tiny point in time and that the earth is just a speck in the cosmos and that fame is entirely empty actually frees you. It liberates you from the anxiety of the future and the crushing pressure of public opinion. If the future doesn't matter and the past is gone, all that is left is the integrity of your current action. It allows you to focus purely 100% on being a good person right now.
It clears the board. You aren't playing for legacy points anymore. You are just playing to play well in this exact second.
Precisely. Furthermore, the text demystifies death itself. Marcus argues that death is merely a transformation, a mystery of nature exactly like birth. It is the dissolution of elements back into the universal whole. He relies on vivid, almost cinematic imagery of impermanence. Time is described as a rushing river, a violent torrent. As soon as a thing is seen, it is carried away and another thing takes its place, which will also immediately be swept away. The universe loves to transform things.
Yeah, the incredible analogy about the wax.
Yes, he compares universal nature to someone playing with wax. First, the wax is molded into the shape of a horse, then it is melted down to make a tree, then it is melted down to make a human being. It's the exact same wax, just constantly being repurposed. When we die, our wax is simply melted down to make the next thing. We shouldn't be angry at the melting, it's just the nature of the wax. And because of this, there is nothing to fear. He presents a fascinating logical argument about time and death. Even the longest-lived person and the shortest-lived person lose the exact same thing when they die.
How is that mathematically possible? The guy who dies at 90 loses less than the guy who dies at 20.
Because you only ever lose the present moment.
Yeah.
You cannot lose the past because it is already gone and you do not possess it. You cannot lose the future because it hasn't happened yet and you do not possess it. You only ever have the razor-thin present. So whether you die at 20 or at 100, you are giving up the exact same amount of time, the current second.
That reframing is absolutely wild. You only lose the present moment. So address this directly to your own life right now. Imagine freeing yourself from the heavy, suffocating anxiety of leaving a legacy or building a brand that outlasts you. Think about how much lighter your daily choices would be if you deeply internalize the fact that the earth is just a tiny dot, and everyone praising you on social media and everyone criticizing you in the boardroom will soon be gone forever. It completely defangs the fear of failure. It defangs arrogance. If no one will remember your failures in 100 years, why are you so afraid to try?
It defangs both failure and arrogance. But it leaves us with a critical core of action. If fame is an illusion, if death is just a recycling of our atoms, and if we are only living in the present moment, what are we supposed to do with our brief time? If nothing external matters, how do we justify getting up and doing the work?
Exactly. So what does this all mean for how we actually live? That brings us to the final major theme of our deep dive, the vine and the soldier. Because Marcus has a very specific view of human action and societal duty that perfectly answers this question of why bother.
If the external rewards, fame, wealth, legacy are stripped away, the only thing left is the intrinsic value of the action itself. The text provides a beautiful analogy for this, the vine. Marcus asks, how should we perform a good deed? He answers that we should do it like a vine producing grapes, or a horse running, or a dog hunting, or a bee making honey. Once the vine produces a cluster of grapes, it asks for nothing more. It doesn't demand applause, it doesn't ask for a receipt, it doesn't look around to make sure the other plants notice. It just produces the grapes, and then it waits for the next season to produce again.
I am fascinated by this analogy because it runs completely counter to how we operate today. We live in a deeply transactional world. We do a favor for a friend, and we immediately open a mental tab. I help them move, so they owe me. Or we do a great job on a project at work, and if the boss doesn't immediately validate us with praise, we feel bitter, resentful, and unappreciated. We are constantly looking for the receipt. Marcus is saying that seeking a receipt for a favor is completely unnatural.
It is unnatural because, according to Stoic philosophy, doing good is its own reward simply because it fulfills our rational, social nature. Just as the eye is rewarded simply by seeing, the human being is rewarded simply by acting justly. If you require external validation to do good, you are handing control of your happiness over to the ignorance of others. The vine analogy eliminates resentment. You act justly because you are a human being, and that is what human beings are designed to do. But this isn't just about doing good in isolation. The text heavily emphasizes the necessity of community.
Yes, and this part really surprised me. There's this modern stereotype of the stoic alpha male who's just a lone wolf, completely emotionally detached, who never needs anyone and bears all his burdens in absolute silence. But in Book 7, Marcus explicitly tells himself the exact opposite. He writes, "Do not be ashamed to ask for help." He uses the analogy of a soldier storming a wall during a siege. He asks, what if you have a limp and you physically cannot climb the battlements alone? Do you just sit there and fail to prove how independent you are? No. You achieve the objective with another soldier's help.
That is a critical nuance that completely shatters the modern misinterpretation of Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius, the commander of the Roman legions, acknowledges that we are built for cooperation. Remember the analogy of the upper and lower teeth? We are part of a whole. Asking for help when you are lame is not a failure of Stoicism. It is a recognition of reality and a utilization of the community to achieve the right objective. We must work together. And this communal duty extends even and especially to how we treat those who wrong us.
Which connects right back to the morning routine with the difficult people. The text insists that a wrongdoer actually only harms themselves because they are degrading their own character. If someone wrongs you, Marcus has a very specific formula. If you can teach them, if you cannot be kind and tolerate them.
Tolerate them because you recognize their actions are born of ignorance. And this tolerance requires a profound acceptance of reality as it is, which brings us to perhaps the most challenging concept in the text, amor fati, the love of fate. The text urges us to accept whatever happens to us just like a patient accepts a bitter prescription from a doctor. Marcus uses the example of the god of medicine Asclepius, ordering a patient to take cold baths or walk barefoot or endure a painful treatment. The patient accepts it because they believe it is for their ultimate health. Marcus argues we should view the events of our lives, even the painful ones, the betrayals, the sicknesses, the setbacks, as prescriptions written by the universe for the health of the whole.
Hey, I have to be honest, I struggle with this one. Accepting a cold bath from a doctor is one thing, but accepting getting fired or a devastating breakup or a terminal illness as medicine prescribed by the universe, how do you actually look at a tragedy and say, I embrace this bitter prescription? It feels like it requires a level of detachment that borders on denial.
It isn't denial. It is a radical recontextualization of reality. The Stoic argument is that the universe operates according to a rational order, the logos. Everything that happens is a necessary gear turning in a massive machine. When you fight reality, when you scream that something is unfair, you are essentially a gear trying to turn backward. You will only grind yourself to dust. Amor fati is the realization that you cannot change the event. You can only change your resistance to it. It neutralizes the victim mentality completely. You stop fighting reality and start asking, how do I use this?
So if you get passed over for a promotion or your flight gets canceled, causing you to miss a crucial event, our instinct is to scream, this is a disaster. But if you apply this mindset, you look at that event and say, this is a bitter medicine. It tastes awful, but it is necessary for the overall order of things, and I will accept it without throwing a tantrum.
Exactly. To illustrate this indestructible inner peace, there is a powerful quote in Book 9. Marcus writes to a stone thrown in the air, "It is no evil to fall, nor good to rise. The stone is just doing what physics demands. We must become like that stone regarding external events. We must remain unbothered by external rises, fame, wealth, promotion, and unbothered by external falls, poverty, sickness, disgrace. We must maintain our inner sanctuary. As the text reminds us over and over, even when people try to harm you, Even when the world is chaotic, they cannot reach your directing mind unless you give them the keys. You have to allow the harm to register as harm. If you refuse to judge the event as an evil, you remain completely untouched.
We've covered incredible ground today. Let's pull all of this together and recap the journey we have just been on. We have basically just decoded the private diary of a Roman emperor who's fighting barbarian hordes on the frontier while simultaneously fighting his own ego in his tent. We learned how to build our character through deliberate observation, creating a gratitude journal of virtues, cherry-picking traits to write a software patch for our own minds. We learned how to forge our morning mental armor, pre-forgiving the ignorant people we will inevitably face, realizing we are all just upper and lower teeth meant to work together.
We explored the Stoic X-ray vision, learning to strip away the illusions of prestige and societal hype to see the raw, unglamorous reality of the things we covet, ensuring our integrity is never sold for sheep's wool. We confronted the great equalizer, accepting the impermanence of time, the ultimate emptiness of posthumous fame, and the liberating reality that we only ever possess the present moment. And finally, we learned the lesson of the vine to do good purely for its own sake, to ask for no receipts, to accept help when we are limping, and to embrace the bitter prescriptions of fate as necessary medicine. The core takeaway from all of this text is undeniably clear. The quality of your life is determined entirely by the quality of your thoughts and your ability to separate external, uncontrollable events from your internal, controllable judgments.
It's the ultimate shortcut to being deeply well-informed and practically resilient. But before we let you go, I want to leave you, the learner, with one last lingering concept. It's a thought derived not just from what is written in this text, but from the reality of the text's very existence. Remember our premise at the beginning of this deep dive. Marcus Aurelius wrote all of this strictly exclusively for himself. He had no audience in mind. He had no publisher. He had absolutely no desire for these words to outlast him. He was just a man in a tent trying to keep his soul clean in a dirty world. So if you were to sit down tonight, close your laptop, put away your phone and write a rulebook strictly for your own soul, knowing with absolute certainty that no one else would ever read it, what raw, unfiltered truths would you have to confront about yourself? What would your thoughts to myself actually say? Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of the mind.